everyone, and welcome to the Disability Justice presentation, part of this year's 2022 North American Drama Therapy Association Annual Conference. My name is Rosamar Hernandez. I'm an RDT BCT, currently working at the VA in Lake City, Florida. For accessibility purposes, I'm a cisgender straight Puerto Rican female with long hair dyed in red, squared brown glasses, and a long sleeve dress with shades of brown, orange, yellow, and green. My background displays a section of my living room with a couple of colorful frames about my island. In addition to this description, something you can tell from the picture frame is that I have cerebral palsy and I use a motorized wheelchair for mobility. Bodies and minds are political. The purpose of the Disability Justice Affinity Group, which operates as a collaboration between NYU and the NADTA CHDEC Committee, is to center disability justice as a need within the NADTA and the various institutions within which we operate in our work and education. And using these principles of disability justice from Since Invalid, which we will review shortly, we facilitate a series of explorations and discussions and ask us to think about open-heartedly our clinical practices, our organizations, and the institutions in which we operate in terms of welcome, access, opportunity, and much more. We are interested in how each of us is responsible for changing the future and making this organization a stronger and more inclusive community. One that has its feet anchored in mutual aid, an ethic of care, in which we no longer have to talk about accessibility because the concern with it is just part of our normal everyday conversation and structure of the organization. Muchos saludos a todos y bienvenidos a la presentación sobre justicia por... Si lo traduzco, diría justicia por discapacidad, pero no me gusta ese concepto. Vamos a decir justicia por diversidad funcional, como parte de la conferencia anual de la Asociación Norteamericana de Drama Terapia para este año 2022. Mi nombre es Rosamar Hernández y soy dramaterapista actualmente trabajando en el Hospital de Veteranos de Lake City, Florida. Por motivos de accesibilidad, soy una mujer puertorriqueña heterosexual con cabello largo teñido en rojo, grandes espejuelos cuadrados en color marrón y visto un traje floral con colores amarillo, marrón, verde y naranja. Mi fondo muestra una sección de mi sala y podrán observar algunos cuadros bien coloridos de mi isla. Además de esta descripción, algo que ustedes no pueden ver en el marco de su imagen es que tengo paralesía cerebral y utilizo una silla motorizada por motivos de movilidad. Los cuerpos y las mentes son entes políticos. El propósito de este grupo de justicia de diversidad funcional, el cual es una colaboración entre la Universidad de Nueva York y el comité de la NADTA SHEDEC, es centrar la justicia de diversidades funcionales como una necesidad dentro de la NADTA y las diversas instituciones dentro de las cuales operamos en nuestro trabajo y sistemas educativos, usando los principios de justicia por diversidades funcionales que utiliza Sense Embedded y más adelante revisaremos. Facilitamos una serie de exploraciones y debates que nos piden que pensemos críticamente y con un corazón abierto sobre nuestras propias prácticas clínicas, nuestra organización y las instituciones en las que operamos. En términos de acogida, acceso, oportunidad y en la medida en que ellos y nosotros podamos operar juntos. Entre ellos y nosotros, dentro de un marco de justicia para la diversidad funcional, visible y no visible, que centre en la liberación, en la interdependencia, en la totalidad y la interseccionalidad. Nos interesa cómo cada uno de nosotros es responsable de cambiar el futuro y hacer de esta organización una comunidad más fuerte e inclusiva, una que tenga los pies anclados en la ayuda mutua, una ética de cuidado en la que ya no necesitamos hablar de accesibilidad porque la preocupación por ella es parte de cada conversación que tenemos en la estructura de nuestra organización. Maria, take it away.
Bonjour. Je suis Maria. Tout le monde est bienvenu ici. Nous sommes ici pour célébrer nos différences, pour apprendre à nous rendre nous-mêmes et notre profession plus réactive et plus accessible. Si vous êtes d'accord avec nous ou en désaccord, nous sommes entendus pour travailler ensemble. Daniela.
Thank you so much, Maria and Daniela, for providing us with greetings in French and in ASL. What is ableism? How does disability justice look like? What is one question that you bring to your practice about disability justice? Ableism, for me, it's this. It's seeing life through a very, very tiny, narrow lens that only allows us to notice a selective group of individuals considered part of our social quote-unquote norm. This way, we negate and miss out on a whole world filled with people with visible and non-visible diverse functional abilities who contribute as equally in our society. Throughout history, a multiplicity of models, terms, and why not labels have been used according to culture, philosophical ideas, social perspectives of that particular time. Approximately 5 years ago, the integrating model was presented. And this model no longer focuses on how to change people with disabilities so that we can adapt to the social norms, but instead sees disability as a functional diversity in order to break down the bias towards normality. Using these diverse functional ability terminology helps us shift our paradigms to look at each other's strengths and maximize the opportunity for these to be used in our professional and personal lives. Disability justice for me is being able to demonstrate my clinical skills without the need to prove them. I still remember the first inpatient psych job I applied for shortly after graduating from the NYU program. Not only I had to, of course, pass a face-to-face interview, but even after scoring the highest of all the applicants, this narrow lens fogged their judgment, making them second guess their decision to give me the position. Hence their request, of course, to run a drama therapy group with not only all the patients of the unit I was applying to, but with leadership and all the members of their IDT team present. I was informed that it was considered the second round in this process. I knew I had to accept it in order for them to confirm what they've seen in my interview. A couple of years later, my supervisor apologized for I was the first and the last candidate required to do a group in order to prove themselves as clinicians. The one question that I bring to this community regarding disability justice is, are we providing sufficient opportunities in a variety of forms and ways for our current and future drama therapists to obtain the continuing education credits required to keep our RDTs and BCTs? I want to invite the rest of the committee to introduce themselves and answer the question of what is ableism, disability justice, and if they too have a question they want to bring to the table.
I'm Maria. I will start. Each of us is going to offer a description of who we are, and then we'll answer Rosamar's question. I'm a 61-year-old white cis woman with gray hair that's pulled back off my face and dark glasses, and I'm wearing a dark shirt, and I have a painting of a wild ocean behind me against a white wall. When I think about ableism and how it performs in me, I think about my inability to discuss openly without nerves or fear or my own struggles, without nerves or fear, my own struggles with depression during and post pregnancy, my own anxiety disorder, my own psychotic symptoms in a time of extreme stress, my substance abuse history, and my own psychopathic antisocial impulses. I can talk about my family history of voice hearing, neurodiversity, bipolar illness, addictions, but have struggled in sharing my own. My training was ableist, and I also see how my own fears of telling the truth about myself, in that I see the deep entrenchment of ableism. Or that idea, well, since I've managed in my struggles, then I'm not all those things I just named. But when I think about ableism, I think about how disability has guided my career and brought me to my work, but how the ableism has literally guided my career as well and kept me apart and at a safe distance from the truth. For me, disability justice is that ability to operate in reverent care of the people who I support professionally, of the people who I love personally, of the world that I aspire to and to tell the truth about, and to disability justice is about telling the truth and about being willing to listen to the truth. It's about fairness and equity for me, and it's about an evolution in drama therapy that from Hamlet's to be or not to be to Robert Landy's that drama therapy is to be and not to be, to a disability justice perspective, which for me is to be and to be and to be, and letting in and letting be seen all aspects of our personhood, our histories, our politics, our capacities, and our love. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. My name is Adam. My pronouns are they, them. And I come to you today, non-binary, Black person. I come to you today, a person in a fat body, not a little body. I come to you today, a person, you can't tell this on the screen, but I am short. I am 5 feet, 5.5 inches. I also come to you today, a person with disabilities, plural. Some you can see by my Black frame glasses. I need them to help me see the world. And guess what? Some you cannot see, which speaks to my mental health. And I'm not ashamed to say that. I want to destigmatize that so that this way we go through the world empowered and not with shame. I come to you today from Brooklyn, New York. I'm in a room with various paintings behind me. You see my plants. I come to you today wearing a Black shirt and Black frame glasses, a Black headband that's holding back blonde braids. I come to you today as me, Adam Stevens. And when I think about ableism, I think how it looks to define and pathologize folks by their disabilities as inferior or less than those who do not identify or show up as having a quote, disability. Ableism is a way to keep those who show up with difference down. Ableism, it is discrimination. Ableism, it is prejudice. Ableism is indeed white supremacy in performance. Now, I move to disability. And when I think of disability, it's the experience or a condition that offers diverse challenges for a person. It offers challenges for a person to do activities or have equitable access within various societies, various structures, and various systems. But listen to me clearly, because this is what I say and here's what I tell you. To have a disability is to have a superpower. Yes. Superpowers are strength-based and empowering, not pathologizing. A superpower is a state that cannot be ignored on this drama therapy stage or any other stage the world presents. My superpowers are rooted in creativity, compassion, and love. I invite you to consider this. What are your superpowers? How do you show up in the world? And what superpowers do you see in others? Thank you.
My name is Daniela Gonzalez. I am a second year student here studying drama therapy. I am originally from Puerto Rico, and I am a CODA, which is a term coined by the deaf community that stands for Child of Deaf Adults. So growing up as a child of deaf adults, I feel that I have been brought up right in the weird, messy intersection in between liminal space of ableism and also just this glorifying idea of what it is to be a hearing person in the world. Being stuck in between these two worlds, being culturally deaf, but being physically hearing, I feel like I have been able to witness ableism at firsthand. And in my life experience, ableism shows up as numerous family members reprimanding me for signing to my parents. Many people coming up to my parents and also just speaking to them in a very condescending tone. A lot of negative assumptions and misconceptions as to how deafness is. A lot of lack of access, lack of sign language interpreters, lack of closed captioning, just lack of accessibility general. The idea that the assumption that everyone in this world is the same, and that everyone in the world has the same needs and the same considerations and the same ideas. That to me is ableism, and it gets worse when differences that show up are actually discarded, are excluded, and are painted with such negative connotations to the point where I was reprimanded for speaking in sign language to my parents. And being part of those in-between worlds, a lot of the negative considerations that were ascribed to my parents would bleed onto me, to the point where I grew up with a speech impediment, and that was seen as the most horrible thing in the world. And I was not allowed to speak with my parents. I had to keep distance with them because I had to improve my speech so I could be just like everyone in this hearing world, the hearing world, quote unquote, because I would not want to generalize that. So that to me is ableism. It's the idea that everyone is the same, and whatever differences that do come up are completely discarded and excluded and painted as completely negative. And being stuck in between that was definitely a lot to think about and a lot to process. And the idea of disability, I feel like, is enmeshed in that, just the disability always being negatively painted and always associated historically with all these characters that hold so much pain and disfigurement and are always excluded from society. And that is what comes to mind. And disability is so much more varied and so much more diverse. And it's a spectrum, it's a range, it's colors. And even the term disability in itself, I would say, can also be challenged. I want to share a term that we use in Spanish called diversidad funcional, which in English translates to a diversity of functions. So that to me is what disability is. It's not the lack of, it is the addition of, sharing Adam's idea of the superpower. It's a diverse way of functioning in the world, and that in itself is valuable, it is special, it is held. And it is, like Maria said, to be it, to be, and to be, it is, and it shouldn't be excluded. Thank you.
I can go. I'm Dana, pronouns they, them. I am a white, fat, non-binary person. I have short salt and pepper hair, green cat-sized glasses, and today I'm wearing a dress that's a black background with like white and yellow flowers. My background is blurred per the Zoom function currently. And I think when I think about ableism, it cannot be divorced from a white supremacist, colonialist, eugenicist worldview, and also capitalism. And so I think one of the ways that ableism affects me is the idea that we have to tie our value as a person to like what we are able to perform or produce, or like the way that our value is tied to our labor in society. And like even, you know, so much of disability inclusion is focused around like how do we give disabled people jobs, which I think shows like how deeply embedded capitalism is in our society. And so I think the part of disability justice that I want to highlight is that like inherent wholeness, or just the inherent value that all human beings have, and being able to recognize like which body minds have like actually been able to like be valued or included, and the harms that are caused by our current systems, and imagining a world where everyone can participate, you know, to the extent that they want to, where everyone is valued, where everyone is seen in all of their complexity. And like, could we actually have a world where we truly value diversity? Because truly, statistically, the vast majority of people will be disabled at some point in their lives, but our current systems encourage people to not see themselves as disabled, or to minimize or deny, you know, any ways that they fall, you know, outside of what is seen as normal or acceptable. And the ways that that, you know, denies us access to our full humanity. And so I think it's complicated, but, you know, I want a world where everyone is valued and has value exactly as they are.
Can go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Turner. I use they, them pronouns. For accessibility purposes, I am wearing a blue denim shirt with some wire rim glasses. I have shoulder length hair that is currently in twists and pulled back, and the background of my screen is blurred. When I think about ableism, I think about my history. I think about how I was denied access to sign language because doctors told my parents that if I learned sign language, I wouldn't speak. I think about the fact that people are surprised that I can speak as well as I do. I think about the fact that people hear I'm deaf and make a lot of assumptions about that I have to correct. And then they make assumptions about the next step. It is constantly assumption after assumption and having to explain myself. I think about how easy it is to feel like I have to explain myself. How that is always my responsibility, and how even the most well-meaning questions can come from a place of deep, deep misunderstanding. And when I think about disability justice, I think about my friends who turn and tell me what's going on in a conversation without me having to ask. I think about groups like this where we get to share our stories and try to make an impact on things that we care about, on a field that we care about so much. I think about the community safety networks that we build for ourselves because we have no other choice. I think about how every day it is one form of survival or another. Thank you.
I can share. I'm Marielle. I use she, her pronouns for accessibility purposes. I am an Ashkenazi and Sephardic woman with blackish, reddish, I dyed it recently, curly hair in front of a wooden screen with some cutouts to hide the mess lurking behind that. When I think of accessibility, when I think of ableism, I'm also always thinking of accessibility. When I think of ableism, I think of the fact that there is this ideal norm and that some bodies, minds, beings are outside of this norm. Ableism is the idea that for disabled, chronically ill, neurodivergent folks to have to out themselves, to have their needs met, that there is not an assumption that all needs are important in the room. In our current world, ableism is the idea that a return to normal applies to all people, when in reality, many of us have been excluded by that normality in the past. Ableism is the idea that accommodations only are included when they benefit able-bodied biotypical individuals, and as soon as they no longer need that, those accommodations disappear. Ableism is having to act as our own advocates in schools, with doctors, with our licensing boards, in our jobs, because no one else is educated enough to care about disability, to care about chronic illness, to care about neurodivergence until they need to. Ableism is places not thinking about having these conversations until a disabled person brings them up. Ableism is all the euphemisms that we have for disability, because how dare we just say the word disabled with pride? Ableism is saying I am differently abled, or I am a person with a disability, or I have special needs. It's all the ways we try to distance folks from our disabilities as if this is a terrible thing. Ableism is the pressure to still show up and be worthy in our society every day. Ableism is against the idea that rest can be productive, that we can be sick and still be worthy. Ableism is the only socially acceptable form of ism that still exists, and often the burden forms on us to speak against it. Yeah, I mean, for me, disability justice is just being able to show up and celebrate our full identity. It is being able to speak truthfully about all parts of our experience without fear of pushback or stigma. It is being able to show up and say, I am neurodivergent, I am disabled, I am chronically ill and have been for the majority of my life, but that I still don't feel safe sharing all parts of that in this room or on this recording, because some of my disabilities may hinder job performance or the ability to get a job. And so that the idea of being selective and even how we share ourselves within the larger NADTA, because this is a community, but this is also our work. And that some identities are not welcome in our work yet. That's what's on my mind today.
I can go. I'm going to spotlight myself for everyone, as I've done for everyone else. My name is Elena. My pronouns are she, her. For accessibility purposes, I am a white, cisgender, gay woman in Brooklyn, New York, wearing a black shirt with yellow tinted glasses that help with my migraine disorder. And I have a brick background in front of me. And to me, ableism is so much everything that has already been said in this room. And I feel that it is the false and oppressive assertion that people living with difference and disability are in any way inferior to those deemed normal or productive within the white supremacist, misogynistic, colonial, and capitalistic constructs that we live under every day. It is institutional, it is interpersonal, it is internalized. And for me, disability justice is an intentional reorientation of my worldview and my practice to meet the needs and desires and wishes of everyone in every room to the best of my ability. It is also leveraging my privilege to center, uplift, amplify the voices that come from lived experiences. And it is also the advocacy that includes calling in acts of ableism, which is acts of violence, in real time to educate others with privilege and power.
Hello, everyone. My name is Courtney. I use she, her pronouns, and for accessibility purposes, I am a short human being, white, cis, with short blonde hair, pink glasses, and I'm currently wearing a black cardigan with a white and black top underneath, and my background is full of flower stickers and a door to my left. I am a person who walks through the world that is not meant for me. And that is what ableism means to me. I have a hearing loss and an auditory processing disorder. That means I kind of walk through the world in this gray area. And the fact that I've had to define it my entire life as a gray area where I know I don't fit in on either side, that's ableism to me. And having to find a way to fit in on one side of the wall when I can't, but also not fitting on the other side of the wall. And ableism means that I am expected to pretend that it's all okay. And I am expected to be able to succeed without asking for help. And when I do ask for help, I am othered, even when it's with the best intentions. And to me, disability justice means being able to bridge that gap in that gray world that I live in. It means that I am able to have a hand extended out to me and have some help when I need it without having to ask. It means that I can stick up for myself even when there's fear, and that I can learn to accept myself and accept others for the way they are without fear and prejudice, wherever and however that exists. Thank you.
So I have been tasked with kind of outlining a little bit of the history of how we got to this point in our current understandings around disability. And some of that you'll see echoes to what everyone shared in their introductions. But what we know is the medical or biomedical model of disability really started and has roots in the age of Enlightenment, and coming out of like the 1830s and the work of Adolf Quetelet on l'homme moyen, or the average man, which is sort of where this idea of like the norm comes from, or like what is normal, or like all of these standards that society holds us to, of like what is a normal human person. And just naming that, even all of that was talking about like a societal level and like statistical norms, but then somehow got shifted to like each of us individually being held to this standard. But also, all of that kind of led to like the rise of eugenics in the 19th century, and a lot of discourse around that. And then also the rise of the Industrial Revolution and the way that capitalism and our labor and productivity started to shift the way we think about like the value of human beings, or the idea that like our bodies are machines, or people are cogs in machines that like need to be able to work in certain ways to like value society. So kind of all of those things coalesce to kind of start to shift the way that we thought about difference, like on a cultural level. And I also just want to name that a lot of this is coming out of like white, Western, colonial mindsets. And so that's kind of like how whatever has become the medical model was born. And then the critiques of the medical model of disability started around the 1950s, and I'm sure were influenced by the desire for deinstitutionalization. A lot of that rhetoric started with the work of Thomas Szasz and the anti-psychiatry movement, and then was expanded. This critique of the medical model was kind of expanded in sociology by those such as Irving Goffman and Kenneth Irving Zola, who also added in physical disabilities to this critique, bringing in. So, I mean, I think it's important to name that the critique has always included like mental, and then how do we understand physical or just the full spectrum of disabilities. And then what we now would call the social model of disability really came out of the 1970s disability rights movement, which again is a very white movement. And in some ways, disability justice is sort of, an answer to disability rights and the limitations of a civil rights-based social movement. And the term, the social model of disability, was coined in 1983 by Michael Oliver in The Politics of Disablement. And the social model sort of has gained the most foothold in Australia, the UK, and the US. So again, this is like a very white Western construct around disability. And we only sort of need the social model of disability because this medical pathological model existed. But the medical model of disability is very much rooted in disability as an impairment or a disease or something wrong or pathological or abnormal that needs to be cured or changed or fixed. So that you can, be this standard of what it is imagined humans are supposed to be. And then the social model counters that by framing the problem of disability as a social problem and as a cultural problem founded on accessibility, saying that people are disabled by these norms, they are disabled by society, and if we could somehow shift society to be more accessible and inclusive, then suffering would be mitigated. And I think a lot of people sort of now have pulled parts of, the medical and social model and mixed them together, because there are, especially when it comes to chronic illness or some disabilities, there will be people where some kind of medical intervention or treatment is still beneficial to them and can help reduce suffering. And so we may not ever be able to completely divorce disability from medicine for all disabilities, but if we could change some of these ableist structures within society, and a lot of people use universal design principles as a way to think about, like, are there ways we could design our spaces or the structures of society to just include a wider range of experiences instead of privileging a very narrow segment of society. And I think while, we shouldn't only privilege, these larger institutions and what they think about disability, I think it could be useful to just forward a few of the current definitions of disability that are out there, given by various institutions, because disabled people, will always kind of have to interact with these structures in order to get our needs met. So I don't know that we can divorce our individual understandings of what disability is from the power structures within society. So I'll just offer those definitions as a starting point for how we can think about what disability is or what it means. So the Americans with Disabilities Act defines that a person has a disability if they have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. The World Health Organization believes that disability results from the interaction between individuals with a health condition that with personal and environmental factors. So I think here, you know, we can see explicitly the attempt to bridge the medical and social models of disability. And then according to the World Health Organization, disability has 3 dimensions. 1, impairment in a person's body structure or function or mental functioning. Number 2, activity limitation. And number 3, participation restrictions in normal daily activities. And then the CDC has a definition of disability that, you know, is clearly influenced by the World Health Organization as well. And so according to the CDC, a disability is any condition of the body or mind, impairment, that makes it more difficult for the person with the condition to do certain activities, activity limitation, and interact with the world around them, participation restrictions. And then finally, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities defines disability as long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments, which in interaction with various barriers may hinder a person's full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. And so a lot of the language around disability is around inclusion and access, and current understandings of disability tend to hinge on this idea of impairment. And so I think culturally, we're sort of in a point of trying to like reconcile these medical and social models, recognizing that people are struggling, people are suffering, but it is not because disabled people are inherently pathological or abnormal and, you know, don't necessarily need to be fixed. And so like, how is it that we can move forward to create a society that where more people are able to fully participate? But I think, you know, then disability justice kind of expands that to going like, is like in this colonialist capitalist system something that like we even want to participate in? And I will just leave you with a definition of ableism that was created by Talila T.L. Lewis in community with disabled, Black, and other racialized folks, which I think crystallizes a lot about the harms that ableism causes in society. So ableism is a system of assigning value to people's bodies and minds based on societally constructed ideas of normalcy, productivity, desirability, intelligence, excellence, and fitness. These constructed ideas are deeply rooted in eugenics, anti-Blackness, misogyny, colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. This systemic oppression leads to people and society determining people's value based on their culture, age, language, appearance, religion, birth, or living place, quote, health and wellness, and or their ability to satisfactorily reproduce, excel, and behave. And you do not have to be disabled to experience ableism. And so, you know, as we move towards and expand the idea of this disability justice framework, I think one of the cornerstones of disability justice is intersectionality. And understanding the ways that all of these systems of oppression are mutually reinforcing. And so I think both the medical and social models of disability can be limiting in that they lack that inherent intersectional lens of what disability is and how it functions in our culture.
My name is Britton Williams. My pronouns are she, her. I come to you as a Black woman. I have Black hair that is locked and comes down to about shoulder length. I'm wearing a Black shirt with a gray blazer on top, and my background is a gray wall with a bookshelf that has overflowing books on it. When I think about ableism, I think about structures, both internal and external, that seek to render some folks not center, that seeks to say that some voices and experiences are not valuable as others, that seeks to say that if you cannot navigate the world in a way that dominant expectations say so, that there is a dismissal and sometimes even an erasure of those experiences. But I also recognize ableism, my own internalized ableism, when I had my surgery and was in the hospital and needed a lot of support to do things that usually I'm able to do, and recognizing myself, pushing myself to be able to do things on my own. Because I'm also steeped in the society that tells me that I should move a certain way, look a certain way, do certain things. And so I recognize ableism is something that permeates every single aspect of expectation and experience. And that even if it's something that I seek to unsettle and undo, that it is something that I also participate in and have an ongoing responsibility to work out my own internalized ableism. Even as someone that experiences my own challenges with certain abilities and framings around what is actually, for me, one of the things that I like to actually ask when we talk about disability is actually what is ability, which I find that for both myself and lots of other folks is sometimes really hard to frame, because it's when we localize in or zoom in on what someone can't do that we start to frame all of these ideas, ideologies around what is normal and what is abnormal. But when we come in from the other entry point, it's often hard to actually pinpoint what exactly are we talking about. So when I think about disability justice, for me, it's actually really about listening across and within, hearing from voices and experiences that are widely varied. It's about slowing down and making enough time to actually recognize that, to make sure that folks have access to the things that they need so that they can navigate the world, that it may actually require us making space for contradictory needs and getting creative enough to figure out how to close those gaps. Because if I go back to ableism often assumes there is a way, the way to do something, and everyone else just has to figure it out. But from a disability justice point of view, we're actually making sure that access is not a luxury, but is actually something that folks have when they need it. Disability justice for me is actually also about for me personally, listening to experiences that are distant from my own so that I can actually stretch my understanding. Even when I have experiences that may be challenging for me in some ways, it does not mean that I have a full understanding or grasp on challenges that other folks experience. So disability justice for me is about knowing when to listen, knowing when to be challenged by my own assumptions, by my own expectations, and being willing to stretch and grow myself. Disability justice is about a word that I hear Maria Hodomarska use all the time, which is interdependence, and also one of the core values of a disability justice framework. But really and truly, when we recognize that actually we need everyone, and everyone's voice, everyone's experience has something valuable to offer. And when I take the time, energy, and effort to listen to that, to lean on and with folks across experience, that we all benefit. And I think that for me is one of the most important pieces of a disability justice understanding, framework, way of thinking and being, is that when we realize that we all benefit from listening to everyone, even if it means that I have to face my own discomfort around some things, that in the end, it actually creates a better, safer, more expansive world for all of us. And so for me, disability justice is about possibility. It's about being able to acknowledge and face the ways in which right now, in many ways, we are not meeting the needs and attending to the experiences in a full and holistic, WHOLE, way of recognizing that there is a range of experiencing, and that the moment that we say something is normal versus abnormal, we actually miss the opportunity to see the beauty that exists across experience and the possibility that exists across experience, and the ways in which when we come together across all of our diverse ways of navigating the world, experiencing and navigating our bodies, that we create structures for us all.
Hey, Britton Williams.
Well, hello, Adam.
So we've been invited to talk about justice and carceral logic, and how that impacts and connects to mental health in this country through the framework of disability justice.
So, I mean, for me, I often, very often start with actually Deborah Danner, who is a Black woman who was living with schizophrenia and penned an essay before her murder, where she really outlined, I feel, the intersections that we're actually being asked to talk about quite explicitly. And I start with her often because I feel like it's important to lift the voices of the folks that experience the most these, you know, these issues that we're talking about, which are not external or just conceptual. They're lived experiences. And what I really take from Deborah Danner, from her writing about her experience and asking people to understand, is that stigma, and when people are stigmatized for their mental illness, as she was, which cannot be separated for a person like Deborah Danner from her being a Black woman who navigated the world, which meant that already so many assumptions were ascribed to her. You know, that when I read her words where she says, if you are a person who stigmatizes, you need to be reminded of the definition. And she puts the definition, but she also goes on to say, you know, we live in a world that looks at folks like me, this is what she's saying, looks at folks like me, and you assume that I don't have anything to offer, that I don't have value. She then goes on, and one of the reasons I go to her words the most is because it's so prophetic. She talks about a Black woman from, I believe, the Bronx. Deborah Danner was also lived in the Bronx. I lived many of my years in the Bronx, named Bumpers, who was murdered by the police, who was in the midst of a episode of psychosis and is just assumed not valuable enough to be cared for. And I think this for me is the intersection when we're talking about justice. What does it look like to see a person, a human being? And in Deborah Danner's words, she gives us the roadmap. She gives us a roadmap of how to treat people, of how to see people and understand people. But she also says that's not what we're doing. And a person like me gets cast aside. The very thing she outlined for Bumpers, a large-bodied Black woman that was murdered by the police, eventually happened to Deborah Danner. Deborah Danner was murdered in her home when police were called because a neighbor heard commotion in her home. And she had a weapon. I can't remember at this point what it was. Was it a knife? Was it something else? But the police come in, and instead of seeing someone in crisis, a human being in crisis, they saw a threat. And they literally rendered her lifeless. They killed her, they murdered her. And so for me, when we're talking about what does it mean to think about justice and carcerality, it's actually to look at dehumanization, quite frankly, that when Deborah Danner is talking about stigma, what she's really reminding us is that when folks are placed in certain bodies and certain experiences, they are not seen as human and their lives are not seen as valuable. And so for me, justice has to require that we are working on in ourselves internally and in the ways that we navigate the spaces we're in externally, really challenging the places in us that could actually dare to see a human being as not human. That's my entry point in this moment.
Britton, thank you. Thank you so much. There's so much there. And when I think of the word social justice, right, which disability justice is so connected to, I think that at its core, at its purest, at its root, at its foundation, it speaks to creating spaces and places that are safer for all.
Yeah.
You know, simply put, yes, social justice has a lot of complexity and a lot of depth, but when we look at it at its root, it's about creating safer spaces for all, right? And I think about the disability justice movement as a connection to the civil rights movement. And I'd be remiss if I didn't locate and identify my own location in that. As a Black person who has Black ancestors, and the fight that my ancestors went through in order so that I could exist and be here in the ways that I am, right? And how that extended to the queer liberation movement, right? And the disability justice movement, and how it is so full and rich of color, right? And that can't be denied. The experience for a white person with disability is much different than the experience of a person who holds the intersection of being Black, Indigenous, a person of color, and having a disability, right? And that's also at the root of disability justice. And it needs to be noted, it needs to be named that our intersections, as you so beautifully mentioned, offer different experiences around disability. I'm going to say that again. Our intersections, our identity and cultural locations offer different experiences around our disabilities and our abilities, our superpowers, as I mentioned before. And that's important because I don't know that people think about that. And we need to. It's not a choice. It speaks to responsible practice, really, right? Both in practice as clinicians and as scholars, as researchers, and also as artists when we create, right? And then this leads me to the work that we do in our drama therapy spaces, right? Which are based on our dramatic reality, our spaces in which justice in its distributive, procedural, retributional, and restorative forms can be the foundation of healing, right? Drama therapy rooms, this rooms that we've all co-created, right? This room is where justice can be demanded, where justice is challenged, and it should be challenged, where justice is practiced and bestowed in community in a breadth and form that is often only aspirational in the everyday reality of our lives and producing the potential for a healing justice.
Indeed. I do want to layer what you've said too and complicate the possibilities here for us to, as drama therapists.
Wait a minute, but you about to complicate it?
I like a little complication every now and then. I like to complicate it sometimes.
Oh, yeah. We're going deeper.
We're going deeper, right? Which is that those possibilities, I think, are so real in this work, especially because we access the possibility that lives within creativity. I think we also have to grapple with the fact that as drama therapists, we can absolutely be complicit, if not perpetuate, carceral frameworks, carceral logics. Even just baseline thinking about our sites, and the precursor often to a carceral experience, surveillance, so how we watch our clients and the assumptions that we attach to the folks that we are working with, the folks that we're supporting in the spaces that we're in. How are we sometimes an extension or a strong arm of carceral expectations, carceral logics? Also, just acknowledging that we sometimes work in sites that don't listen to people. I mean, I can't tell you how many times working on a hospital unit, someone has said to me, like, listen, I should not be here. I'm going to lose my job if you all don't let me go. How do I explain to my family, I came here to get help and I didn't want to stay here. That is a carceral framing. I am working when I'm in a space where someone is telling me that is a carceral framing. And we have to grapple as clinicians with the fact that we do participate in systems that were framed. I mean, if we draw back the history, and our time today does not allow for a deep dive into the history. So my hope is that anyone.
It's important to mention it.
It is
It's important to name it. Yes.
It's important to mention it and name it. And I hope that anyone who is in this work is delving into the history of our field, which is born out of intersectional oppressive framings that were not meant to support, uplift, and hold and nourish everyone. So we can't be surprised when the systems that we're working in today, rooted in the histories that they were born in yesterday, using yesterday expansively, are hurting and harming certain people. Like I'm thinking about Liat Ben Moshe's book, where she talks about decarcerating disability, raceability. We cannot separate systems of care that are steeped in those intersections of racism, saneism, and ableism. And so this is, for me, in order to do what you're talking about, Adam, which I so deeply believe in, it does require that we grapple with, come face to face with the ways in which our systems are operating oftentimes within these structures, and how easy it can be for us to, that slippage into complicity is often just takes a very simple, move, and we don't always recognize it. And so that's how I want to complicate it, is because sometimes I do hear people frame drama therapy and the creative arts therapies as open possibility that is just inherent. But let us be careful, myself included, to not think that that is the only way, and to grapple with the carcerality that is baked into our own systems, external and internal.
Britton, thank you. It's, it's connected to a sense of transparency and authenticity in our work, and identifying who we are and how we show up. And not just the fun bits. We're drama therapists, we're creative, we're expressive. Yes, we are. But we're also part of these oppressive systems. And we need to name that with those that we're working with. We need to have an awareness of that and how we are operating within, right? I think a lot about some of the people that I've worked with, and they have shared that, within these systems, it feels like jail. And this is from schools to hospital settings. It feels like jail. Now, this is where they're meant to find healing, where they're meant to learn and grow, rehabilitation, recovery. And they are explicitly saying, this feels like jail. And in some cases, people have been in formal jails, and they say, this is worse than jail. So that's information, isn't it? And that information is telling a story. And the story, for me, says that we need to be more thoughtful around how we are entering in, right? And it's not easy. I want to recognize that too. It's not easy. We go to work to do our job. We go to work to pay our rent and to earn a livelihood, and so on and so forth. And this is encouraging people to go just a little bit extra. And there's a noticing, right, of those who go that extra mile and of those who don't. And it begs the question, why?
Yeah.
And this is an encouragement to a gentle, loving encouragement, not a demand, a challenge, if you will, to go that extra mile. And it can look very many different ways, but explore. Become curious. When you spoke about the history, become curious about the history, become curious about ways. Britton, you and I right now, we are in conversation, therefore we are modeling what this can look like. And if we're just that more thoughtful, that's the start. That's good enough. And it leads to so much more. That we know is true. It leads to so much more. Being in community, being in conversation leads to progress, leads to change, leads to dismantling some of these carceral and oppressive systems that we are indeed speaking to in this moment, right?
Absolutely. I mean, and the piece I would add to this challenge is for us to be willing to disentangle ourselves to be all good. Which does not mean, and what I mean by that, not to say that I'm saying I'm bad. It's not, for me, this is not a binary. Actually, I'm actually asking us to disrupt a binary framing of I am good or bad. We are so steeped in binaries, that could be a whole thing. And a lot of times what I find folks, myself included, that I can get wrapped up in sometimes is that feeling of, well, if I look at this and I realize how I've been complicit with or perpetuated something, then what does that say about me? And it does not say that I'm a bad person. It says that I have internalized beliefs or ways of being that are harmful to folks. And I will leave it here for now. It was the greatest, one of the greatest gifts one of my clients gave me in the middle of a group when I worked in a system that I feel often treated our patients as if they were actually in prison. And in the middle of one of my groups, someone spoke to a client, a colleague spoke to one of my patients with grand disrespect. And he just said to me, you know, Britton, as much as I like you and love your groups, you are part of this system. And it doesn't matter, but you are, you know, that you may love your work and what you do, but you are part of this system. And I've taken his words very much to heart, because it's a reminder that it doesn't matter all the good things that I'm doing in other places, that right now I'm sitting in a space where something is happening to him that is causing him distress. And I am a part of that system, period. And to hold that. And the question, period. And the question is, what will I do in this moment and in every moment after that to make sure that he doesn't have to endure that? And that, to your point earlier, that we have room for everyone to have what they need. For me, that's what it's about. So can we disentangle ourselves from binary thinking and recognize we are all steeped? This residue is on all of us in some way. Even if we have the lived experiences, we're steeped in a world that asks us to navigate in certain ways. Can we be willing to look at ourselves fully, completely, and still love ourselves and give ourselves grace to grow? Can we give ourselves grace to grow?
Absolutely. You know, disentangling binaries. Sonya Renee Taylor refers to it as banishing those binaries.
Yeah.
So let's allow ourselves, we're creative arts therapists, we're drama therapists. Let's be imaginative. Let's banish the binaries. And in doing so, you know, it leads me to, as we end our moment, Britton. And Britton, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yolo Akili, founder of the Black Emotional Mental Health Collective, proposed the following definition of healing justice: an ongoing practice of ongoing, you hear what I said there? Ongoing, never ending practice of engaging with our emotional selves that fosters tenderness, liberation, and interdependence with others. May we proceed with the Yolo Achilles aspiration.
Indeed.
Britton, lots of love, and lots of love to you all out there.
Indeed.
So as was shared earlier, I'm just going to speak a little bit more about the disability justice movement and how and why that's relevant to what we're seeing in the NADTA right now, since this is our conference. So the brief, 2-minute history of the disability justice movement, because time is real. As Dana mentioned earlier, disability justice was a response to the disability rights movement. The term was coined in 2005, and the movement was created and centers the voices of multiply marginalized people with disabilities, which were largely left out of the disability rights movement. Disability rights movement largely focused on the experience of white individuals, and largely focused on the experience of folks with physical disabilities, and ignored invisible disabilities and neurodivergence. This also marked a shift in looking at how intersecting identities impact the experience of disability, as opposed to just looking at disability as an isolated part of an individual's identity. I'll root us in a quote from Mia Mingus, who is a really huge disability rights advocate, a huge part of the movement. Disability justice is a multi-issue political understanding of disability and ableism, moving away from a rights-based equity model and beyond just access to a framework that centers justice and wholeness for all disabled people and communities. I think that sums it up. I don't even really need to speak anymore, but I will. Disability justice then raises the thought that ableism and justice for disabled individuals won't be achieved only through shifting laws. This was a big push for the disability rights movement. The focus was on changing the laws, which, like, yay, we got the ADA out of that, but that's not enough. Even with the ADA organization, spaces were grandfathered in, so we can still go to a hotel without a wheelchair ramp, or without a ramp to use, because it was built before 1990, and that's not really enough. Disability justice focused on a few key shifts from the disability rights movement and from past models. The first was there was a focus on individual rights, and now we're moving towards a focus on universal rights, more of a movement or collective-based work. I know Courtney will speak later about the 10 principles of disability justice, and this is a big part of that. It moved from an individual fight for access for my own needs or for our own needs towards collective liberation and access for all needs. We moved from a focus on access in general to suddenly a focus on the whole being, that the whole experience is relevant and not just where we have access and where we don't. This shift also mirrored a movement away from a medical model, which Dana spoke on earlier, towards a social model of disability. This shift away from the idea that a disabled body is the problem needing to be solved, and more as society being the barrier. Disability justice recognizes that disability exists within every single group and identity. Disability is not in isolation. It represents a more diverse spectrum of disability. Suddenly we get to hear more about disability beyond only physical disabilities. We're hearing more about mental disabilities. We're hearing more about interconnected disabilities, neurodivergence, chronic illness. It centers the experience, words, and leadership of disabled individuals, particularly those with multiple marginalized identities, which ties into the leadership of most impacted that you'll hear about later. Disability justice was really rooted in the work of Sin's Invalid, a disability justice-based performance project that incubates and celebrates artists with disabilities. This centralized artists of color and LGBTQIA gender variant artists as communities who have become historically marginalized. They are the ones who initially proposed the 10 principles of disability justice. If we look at our world right now, as we are, we are recording this on Sunday, October 23rd in 2022, 1 in 4 people has a disability. And even that statistic alone is not true, because that is only folks who felt comfortable or safe self-identifying. So most likely this number is much greater than we realize. And my wonder for us today is how we hold that truth when we look at the field of drama therapy. How we hold the truth that at least 1 in 4 individuals in the rooms with us, in our workshops with us, in our field with us, in our spaces that we're working with, have a disability or identify as disabled. As we look at disability justice through the lens of our NADTA community and drama therapy as a whole, I'll encourage us to reflect on where we are seeing disabled voices and leadership. We're seeing it right now, but where are we seeing it beyond the world of the invisible walls of this presentation? Where do we see disabled experiences not only being acknowledged, but celebrated as a key identity? How are these voices being pulled up, highlighted, and centered within our field just as they were when we shifted into a disability justice framework? In our organizing, where are the reflections of disability that newer therapists and therapists in training can look to as leaders and mentors? And how are we creating sustainable programs and models that support and uplift therapists with our own unique access needs? And what would shift if we all applied this lens to our work, not just those of us who need to for our own accessibility or accommodations? And those are the questions that I hope you take with you today, the questions that I hope continue as you hear more about disability justice through the rest of this presentation. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It is Courtney again. I am here to talk about the 10 principles of disability justice and what they mean to me as a hard of hearing individual who walks through the world with an auditory processing disorder. And my definitions and my view of the disability justice principles might be different than what you believe or what you see, but this is what they mean to me. So the first principle of disability justice is intersectionality, which to me means that it is a concept that social constructs such as ableism, which we talked about, white supremacy, which we also talked about, capitalism, heteropatriarchy, they've all created this system of discrimination that has affected much of the population in which we work with and much of the population of the world, myself included. The second principle of disability justice is leadership of the most impacted, which means that we have a duty to be led by those who know and work within and are a part of the system. The third is anti-capitalism and anti-capitalist politics, which means that we should not be influenced by money or profit on people. What we should do is be part of a non-conforming system with both our bodies and our minds. The fourth is cross-movement solidarity, which means that we need to shift how we understand, how we talk about social justice, and how we understand and talk about disability, and how we contextualize ableism. The fifth is recognizing wholeness, which means that all people have inherent worth outside our commodity relations, outside capitalist notions, and outside the scope of ability and how we view the world. Everyone has their own life, their own unique experiences, and has their own stories and their own history that should be shared. The sixth is sustainability, which means that we are all meant to be built to last long term as individuals and as collective society. And that our own lived experiences should guide us towards liberation and this movement that we're talking about. The seventh is commitment to cross-disability solidarity, which means that we should truly honor and listen to and have the insight of our whole community, and that all of us should be able to participate in these conversations that we have, because isolation is what undermines our collective liberation. The eighth principle of disability justice is interdependence, which means that we truly should be able to meet each other where we're at, and that this is what's going to help us build towards liberation, and that solutions made by the state are inevitably what extends to further and control the lives of each other and of ourselves. The ninth principle of disability justice is collective access, which means that we have a duty as a diverse disabled collective to bring flexibility and creative nuance that goes beyond the able-bodied and able-minded normativity with each other. And the last principle of disability justice is collective liberation, which means that no body nor mind can be left behind in this ongoing movement that we have. And by working together, this is how true change can happen.
Pause there. Welcome to the field. Stories not here need to be told. Survive and pivot. Complexity. The need to exist. Giving bits of ourselves. Hiding others. Humbled by the project. How slowly the wheels turn. But they turn. They're turning to do better alongside each other. Everybody here is why I'm here. When we do the welcoming down in the dumps, welcoming access, opportunity, ethic of care, a simple, natural part. Gray area, brick wall. A system of care that imprisons. All mental health is built on the foundation of a prison. What are we locking away? I can go. Being on the outside. Diversity of function. Superpower. I, me, you, we need. Advocacy. Performance. Community. Don't need to be fixed. Show up. Stop hiding parts of me, because this is work. Pick and choose assumptions. But wait, stories not here need to be told. I have a duty to flexibility and nuance. We are a collective. No one is left behind. That is truth telling. What does liberation look like, sound like, feel like, smell like? We co-create context. That is our truth telling.